Today I have with me a professional UFC fighter ranked currently as number 4 in the lightweight division. He's an amazing father and husband and also a devoted follower of Jesus Christ, Beneil Dariush. Thank you so much for making the time, man.
My pleasure.
It's the third time that we're meeting. I don't know if you remember this, but I actually met you in 2020 first convention in Tucson, Arizona. We met, you had your baby daughter in your hands before she was able to walk.
That's right.
So it's nice to see you a year after that.
Yeah, how's everything going?
Good, man. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. So you're, as I said, a devoted follower of Christ. And with that, in America, there's a lot of up and downs in terms of morality, what people think are right and wrong, which one's the right religion to follow, and whatnot. So I want to get down to the root of what you believe, why you believe it, and go from there.
All right.
So in the UFC, back in the day, they used to put the Iranian flag by your name when you would come out and fight. Now it's the American flag. But a lot of people associate you with Iran. And so my first question to you is, do you remember how it was in Iran being a Christian? Were you ever afraid of going to church and worshiping back then in that country?
You know, I came from Iran when I was 9, and then I used to go visit during the summer. So I remember Iran pretty well. I lived in a small village called Jutapa in Urmi. You know, I was too young to understand these things at that time. The fact that there was danger in being a Christian in the Middle East. Obviously, I understood that it was different because most people are Muslim, but I never felt like I was in danger. The village we were in, everyone was very kind to us, and you know, our churches had been there before a lot of the families that actually were there. So it was one of those things I didn't realize it till I got older, especially my last. Maybe my last year there, I think I was 17. I started seeing things a little bit more clearly, recognizing like the danger, because you know, 17 is you're basically a man over there, and so they said, hey, if you do this, this is gonna happen. If you do this, this is gonna happen, and all of a sudden, I realized, oh man, this is very, very different than America, and I genuinely realized why my parents brought us here.
So were they more lenient on children? Is that why you didn't think about it or hear about it too much?
Of course, of course. For example, when I was a little kid, like I could walk in shorts and maybe a tank top, and even even as I got a little bit older, like early teens, but like once you become, you know, 15, 16, 17, you can't even wear shorts or a tank top. It's not gonna be. It's like, you know, they look
Right.
down on that, and then obviously many other things as far as interactions go. If I'm walking with let's say with another girl who's around my age, and if she's not my sister and the police stops me, they say, hey, who is this woman? If she happens to be a friend, they're gonna be like, that doesn't fly, you have to get married to her right now.
Just
Yeah.
to walk with her.
Yeah, these are things, you know, these are things I didn't see until maybe my last year. You can't just be walking around with a woman that's not your sister, your mother, or your wife. Things like that. You would either have to go to jail or you would have to marry her. So it was eye-opening my last couple of years there.
Got it. So when you were going to the churches there, do you have to sneak in, go on hours where there's not too many people looking? How did you feel?
So because Assyrians, we were there. Christianity was our churches were there before Islam came and Iran became a Muslim country. They allowed us to worship. Assyrians were allowed to gather and worship without any problems. But if we were to try to share the gospel with let's say the Muslims, or allow a Muslim into our church, we would face the same repercussions as the Muslim. And you know what the repercussions are for someone who tries to change their faith from Islam to, let's say, Christianity or anything else.
Right.
Death.
Got it. Okay. So I just wanted to set that baseline so the people who weren't aware of what the culture and environment in Iran is like, so they know that moving forward this conversation. My next question now, you're in America, okay? You have the freedom practically to choose any religion you want to follow. You don't have to worry about the repercussions of choosing a different religion. Why Christianity? What about this religion is so compelling to you?
You know, in my, I wasn't really a believer. I would go to church. It was more of a social thing for me. I would, you know, my family they're Christians, but I was not. I would say I stayed outside of the church for as long as I could. And when I did come to come to God, to Jesus, I had a lot of doubt still. You know, I was like, what if I'm worshiping the wrong God? What if, you know, what I've been told is I try to question everything basically.
Did you think that was okay?
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, I fortunately had a good pastor who said, you know, look into it. Like, don't be afraid to look into it. So I decided to look into it, and to be honest with you, the more I looked into it, the more I was strengthened in my faith. One of the things I think we don't talk about enough in America is apologetics. Apologetics is defending of the faith, and Christian apologetics. I started like following a lot of different apologists and listening to them and reading their books, and I realized the history of Christianity and how it became, and the atonement at the cross. Like, there are things that just made more sense in Christianity than any other religion. I felt that it was the most cohesive, coherent message out of everything. Because, for example, you go to these other religions, and when we talk about sin and getting into heaven or whatever, it's always by works. You have to do A, B, and C, and if God approves of it, you'll get into heaven. When Jesus says, like, sin completely separates you from God, I felt that. Like, I felt that makes more sense. Because you commit a crime, you can't just expect to do good things. Like, let's say you murdered someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you lied, and it caused death and whatever. You can't just expect to do good things and then end up in heaven,
It
or
evens
end up cleared from that mistake.
Yeah.
So I genuinely felt like, okay, good works, it just doesn't make sense, because you can't have good works try to outweigh your bad works, especially if your bad works eventually lead to death.
Right.
And that's what sin is. It leads to death. So the atonement of Jesus Christ made the most sense. No way I can work myself to heaven. Atonement, where Jesus steps in front of God the Father and pays for the sins, that made the most sense to me, because I recognized at some point, like, the ability to work my way to heaven, it was incoherent. It just doesn't make sense, because if you think about the repercussions of sin, doing a couple of nice things isn't going to do the trick. And then also, if you think about it, if you realize, okay, I did a couple of bad things, then if I just do some good stuff to go, your motivation is no longer the love for God, but it's access to heaven. So that was another reason that I realized it doesn't work. But when Jesus takes the sin and he takes that punishment and he allows me in his place to go forward, that made the most sense to me. And it also just, it's the reason why I fell in love with him. What I couldn't do, he did. And the crime that I should have paid for, he paid for. So it's what made me fall in love with him. And that's really why the more apologetics, the more I looked at history and everything about it, it just, Christianity made the most sense. I've looked at other religions, and it's difficult. I'll use Buddhism for an example, because it's very popular right now, I would say, in America. But, like, the goal of Buddhism is to kill your desires. Is from my understanding, is to completely kill your desires, which would mean to kill my desire to love my wife, my children, my desire for martial arts. Like, I would have to kill all my desires. Well, if I'm killing all my desires, and that's going to help me reach nirvana or enlightenment or whatever, like, okay, that's fine. Let's say I pull that off, but then they tell me, like, okay, that's what Buddha did. And then once Buddha did that, he started teaching this same thing. So wait a minute. You tell me this guy had a desire to teach after he killed all his desires? It doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
So how does he go from reaching enlightenment and not desiring anything to desiring to teach this enlightenment to everybody else? So just, you start asking questions. If you get down to the basics of it, Christianity is so different. It is, you could say it's fundamentally different and maybe superficially similar.
Sure. Got it. And I understand we're both Assyrians, so obviously the Assyrian church is something that's in the very core of us since we were kids, going to church-going people. Does the sect of Christianity matter?
So here's what I believe. You are saved by the blood of Jesus. That's it, right? And you recognize him as Lord. And I understand there's different sects, but for example, take Catholics. I've met Catholics. I'm not a Catholic, but I've met Catholics who I think are better Christians than me, because they love the Lord. and I don't agree with all their theology, but I recognize they love the Lord, and I've seen different sects that they change who God is, and that's the scary one. That's where it's scary because I mean Jesus talks about it. It would be better to not be born than to lead others astray. So I mean it's a tricky question, but I think ultimately your goal should be to seek Jesus and seek His Word, which is the Bible.
Got it. And I want to get to understand that point where you started doing that. So I understand that jujitsu is intertwined with how you found Christianity. Can you explain that story to me?
Sure, I was a competitor. I started when I was 18, fell in love with it. I made winning God. I was not a Christian, and I loved competition. I loved the idea of breaking somebody and then finally winning. There was just every part of it I loved, and I thought this was it. This was going to fulfill me. This was going to do everything. If I just keep winning, everything's going to fall in its place. Like if I'm supposed to get married, it'll happen. If this is everything's going to happen. If I'm supposed to be rich or I have money or whatever, it'll happen as long as I do my job and I win. And so I tried that, and in about 5 years, I got to the pinnacle, which was the black belt. That's right. I was supposed to be the next big thing, and as a black belt at every belt, I had won prestigious tournaments, worlds and Pan Americans and Abu Dhabi. I competed in all those tournaments, right? And right before I'm about to go into competition as a black belt, I start to have trouble at home. When I say trouble, financial problems, and so my family asked me to step up, and this is the first time my mom's ever asked me to do anything. And so at that moment, I recognized, the fear and pain in her, and so I stepped up. But at the same time, I didn't know what I was supposed to do.
Mm.
I'm just a kid who's been kind of spoiled, to be honest with you, because everything I ever did at that point was for myself. If I worked, it was to pay my own training bills and things like that. My mom always supported me, whatever I did. And so, with that being said, I remember talking to her, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, and then going back into my room and thinking, man, it's not going to be okay. I don't know what I'm going to do here. So uh, that was the moment I decided to start praying. I looked left, looked right, couldn't figure it out, so I looked up. And when I started praying, I prayed. I was like, hey, if you're up there, if you're the real deal, I need some help. And so doors started opening where my MMA coach started calling me for fights. I had a fight in Brazil, which paid me more money than I've ever made for at this point in my career. As a competitor of Jiu Jitsu, most of the time I would have to pay to compete. So, and I had fought before MMA, but I had made so little, or I had to pay to fight because my medicals. It wasn't something feasible in order to take care of my family. But all of a sudden, I get a call to fight in Brazil, and this crazy, like, for me at that time, this was a crazy number to get paid. They were gonna, if I won, it was like $5,000, and I was like, sign me up. So 4 weeks, 5 weeks later, I'm in Brazil. I win the fight, come back, give the money to my mom, and she's like, oh, this is great. And I was like, okay, time for me to go back to jiu-jitsu. And she's like, well, we got debt, we got bills. They don't go away. Like, this is great, but like, what about the month after that? And so I had to do the same thing. I went back and prayed, and the more I prayed, the more doors opened. And at some point, I started to feel guilty. I was like, imagine having someone you ask whatever you want and they answer it. Man, at some point, you're like, hey, like, what's the deal here? Do you want something from me? So I remember just being like, hey, do you want something from me? I remember praying that, like, saying, God, do you want something from me? And the first thing that came to my mind was my wrestling coach, who happens to be my pastor even to this day. He would always invite me to church on Sunday, and I would say I can't because I have jiu-jitsu on Sunday. And so that was the first thing that came to my mind. So I started going to church. Church was, I wouldn't use the word great for me because I was uncomfortable with the music. I was uncomfortable with the sermons. Everything they talked about, as far as bad, I was. Obviously, bro, I was a sinner. I was a fornicator. I did all the things that you would not want as a devout Christian. So it was a battle just to stay there. But I stayed because I genuinely felt that's where God wanted me. And obviously, if you're listening to sermons, if you're in church, you're going to hear about this Jesus fella, right? And so I kept hearing about him, and obviously I was very interested in him. And as an Assyrian, obviously I've heard, I know who he is, but like not really. So I decided to pick up the Bible and started reading. And then that was the change. Once I started reading the Bible and I recognized his character and who he was and what he did, he was so attractive and it was so easy to fall in love with him. And that's what I did. But I obviously I wrestled for a few years, but I would say I started going to church when I was 22, around like 24, 25, I genuinely committed my life to him. I gave him my life. I said, "You're Lord and Savior." I recognize that. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna try to like make deals with you, because I'd be like, "Listen, I'll do all of this, but I still want to keep doing this sin." You know what I mean? Like, I still want to have this sin. And then I would say it was like 24, 25. I said, okay, it's going to be just your way.
Completely surrender.
Yeah, complete
Got it.
surrender.
See,
Exactly.
the thing is about a lot of people, they say, well, if God's real, why do they let this hard thing happen in my life? Why would they allow these hardships? Why wouldn't he just let my life be easy and let all good things happen? And then for you, the hardships with the financial situations actually led you to God.
Amen. Yeah. So, I hear that a lot about suffering and hardships. And first of all, you have freedom, and especially in America, to make decisions, right? And your decisions are what causes your hardships a lot of times. Sometimes not, but a lot of times it is. It's just your decisions. And then there's also, for example, the brokenness of the world, where, for example, the earthquake that recently happened, and people die. You take a minute back and you say, well, if the story of Christianity is true, the reason why this is happening is because we said we want to be our own leaders and we want to do things our own way. So why do we turn to God and complain as soon as something we don't like happens? You
Right.
want to be your own leader, you want to do things your own way, and then when things don't go the way you want, all of a sudden you want to go back and complain to him. And you know what's weird too? I hear this from atheists a lot. You talk to an atheist, a scientific atheist, he talks to you about evolution and survival of the fittest, right? It's the thing that I always hear. And then when you ask the atheist, well, why don't you believe in God? He'll point to suffering, and it sounds strange to me, because you just mentioned suffering to be the key factor in being survival of the fittest, which helps evolution and all that. But then when someone asks you, hey, like, why don't you believe in God? You go to suffering. So either suffering is a tool that helps humanity and other animals, whatever, evolve and adapt and grow, or like, or is it a stick for you to keep God away? Like,
Right.
you have to make a choice, So because when God's not involved, you have a very clear answer for why they're suffering. But
Right.
when God's involved, all of a sudden you use it as a tool to keep them away from you. It's a very strange dynamic. So I've noticed that a lot. In order to keep God away, they use basically God's
Methods.
not methods. I would say the word suffering, like, it's not an evolution. It's not a word that you'll find in science. It's not. It's a word you would find in the Bible. It's a word you would find in more religious contexts, right?
Mm.
So they'll take something from God and use it against him. But when it's time for like to use it in the same aspect for science, they say, no, oh, this is great. It actually allows us to adapt, evolve, be better. So it's always one of those things where I don't get it. I just don't get it, and I don't know if they're blind to it,
Mm.
or they just it's a convenient way out.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to my mind when we were saying that is that we're so quick to yell at God for all the pains in this world, but or if something doesn't go our way, but why isn't it that we get mad at the devil for trying to trick us to go against God?
Yeah, well, that's another thing too. So you go to people who don't believe in God, and when things go wrong, they'll point the finger at him, but they won't point the finger at themselves, like you
Mm.
said, or the devil. I don't know. It's a weird question. Religious people who I would say are really based in the works of it,
Mm.
where they think like, I did this, this, and this, so I should be getting good things coming back to me. And those are the people that I always notice seem to always raise their fist at God, because they thought, oh, I did A, B, and C, so I
Mm.
deserve D.
Got it. And so, as you mentioned, jujitsu is an important role for you to find your way to God. What got you into jujitsu? Why'd you try it out?
Well, it wasn't anything special. I watched the UFC at that time. I think it was called UFC Unleashed back then.
Mm.
I watched George St. Pierre fight, and I was a big fan of him. And I was about to go to college. the reason why I started doing jiu-jitsu is because I hated working out. I still do. I hate working out. I always tell my conditioning coach, like, once I'm done fighting, we're going to have to figure something else out because I'm never coming back here, right? With that being said, I just started doing jiu-jitsu so I don't get fat. Everybody was telling me, oh, you go to college, you drink, you party, whatever, and you get fat. Obviously, I started doing jiu-jitsu. I fell in love with competition. I don't drink. I wasn't partying, and I still don't to this day, which has been, I think, something that's been very helpful. So I started jiu-jitsu just so I don't get lazy and fat and be a normal college guy.
Got it. That's awesome. I never
Yeah.
heard that story before, so
Yeah.
that's awesome. Now that later on in your career, you're in the public eye now, and you've gotten a lot of big fights. In post-fight interviews with Rogan, especially in Fight 262, as you beat your last opponent in that fight, the whole entire arena was booing you. And as you were booed, you still went out and you thanked Jesus Christ. It's hard to do that when you're being backlash and ridiculed in front of all those people. Do you ever feel like shying away from ever giving that message? You did it especially when people were booing at you.
You know, I have before shied away, and it's I've come to realize, like, I'm either going to please the creator of the universe, or I'm gonna please people that have don't care about me, who are gonna, forget about me the next day. So
Mm.
that's one thing, and I never felt good when I shied away from God. Never. Like, afterwards, even if I got something good out of it, it's never worked out well for me. And it's not, obviously people always talk to me and say, listen, if you do A, B, and C, you could be more famous, you could make more money, and you can have more. And you think about it, what more is there than being able to have a relationship with God, and to be able to follow His ways and to do what He wants you to do, and to be on that path. People always talk about freedom. If if you were built for a certain purpose, there's no greater freedom than following that purpose. If you were to do something else, you're actually losing your freedom. So that's the way I look at it now. I know who I fight for. I know that I fight for an audience of one, and I know what I stand for, and so the days of shying away from God are over. I hope.
Was that early on in your career?
Early on, I'll tell you a story actually about Abu Dhabi. You mentioned, like, oh, I went out there and I was such a brave or victorious, whatever you want to call it. My first time in Abu Dhabi, I was too afraid to put on a cross on my shirt. I had a shirt that was wrestling that had a cross. I was too afraid to put that shirt on because I thought, someone's gonna not like it and it's gonna cause problems. So I put it back down, and so I remember doing that, coming home, and going to church. I remember my pastor was going over a sermon, and it was from I believe it was Corinthians, but he brought up something Jesus says about, if you deny me before other men, I'll deny you before my Father. And I remember it just broke my heart, because that's what I did at that moment, and it broke my heart. And I said, never again. If the opportunity comes up, never again. So once I got back into Abu Dhabi, I knew I would. I wanted God to redeem me, and He did. He held my hand through it. Obviously, like you said, it's frightening, but He held my hand through it, and I'm still grateful to Him to this day.
Now that you mentioned that, I like to share this story with you that I had a similar experience. So I went to Jordan in 2018. I was 18 years old. I'm a quarter Jordanian. My mom's half. And so we were driving to Petra. And before I left, I was with my brother and my mom and my cousins, and we don't speak any Arabic. Me and my brother, we don't speak Arabic. The rest of my family do. And I asked my uncle, who lives there, why don't people wear crosses here? There's a lot of Christians here. Why don't they wear crosses? He goes, there's too much profiling. And so I kept that in the back of my mind all the time because I wear this cross I wear this cross everywhere that I go. And so we're driving to Petra, and I never thought I was going to ever tell this story, especially publicly, but here we go. As we're driving, we get stopped by a checkpoint. We're in the middle of the desert. I'm with three women in the car, and it's just me and my brother who don't speak Arabic. And at the checkpoint, there's two men who are screaming at us for passports in Arabic, and they have the AK-47s. In that moment, at 18 years old, I felt extremely afraid, so I took my cross off. My brother actually saw it. And so in that moment, I was too afraid to admit what I did wrong. I thought I was protecting my family. Um, it destroyed me for about a year. And I still get emotional thinking about it. And I used to ask for forgiveness over and over and over and over. And then I heard a quote one time saying, imagine you went to your real life father and you asked him for forgiveness. And he goes, okay, son, I forgive you. And then imagine you go the next day and you say the same exact thing. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, son. I'm sorry, dad. And he
yeah,
goes, okay, son, I understand. I forgive you.
yeah,
And imagine doing that day after day after day. Your dad eventually is going to be like, what? You're annoying me now. Stop. I already said I forgive you. That helped me be more at ease, but I've experienced something that you've had too. And also, I always think back to the story where Peter denied Christ 3 times, even though Christ told him to his face, "You will deny me 3 times," and he
yeah,
said, "I never will." So
yeah.
those stories always help me bring back to ease, and so I just felt compelled to share that with you.
Appreciate that. And Peter is our best example. He became the leader of the church. And funny you mentioned Petra. I was there. I think it was 2015 or 2016, and this was after I had traveled to Abu Dhabi. And at that time, ISIS was killing Assyrians and Yazidis. And I had a shirt that was given to me with the letter Nun,
Mm.
in Arabic, the N letter. And I remember opening up my bag, going to grab a shirt, and that was the shirt that came up. And there was the day we were supposed to go into Israel, because we were in Jerusalem, but we were going into the area where it was Muslim dominant, and I was like, all right, I'm not putting it back. I've already made this mistake once. I'm not putting it back. So I put that shirt on and went out there, and it was scary. I'm not gonna stop. A guy on a motorcycle kind of stopped and asked me, "What's that about?" And I kind of explained it to him. The Noon stands for Nazarene, and he just drove off. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, is he gonna come back with a
Right.
gun or something?"
Yeah.
And then we went to Petra from there, and I get it, bro. It's not a it's a scary feeling, but once you make up your mind, you make up your mind.
Yeah. From that moment on, I always told myself I will die with the cross on moving forward. I will never carry it away from that again. But it was a learning experience for me, and I hope to rectify that through messages like this. At the same fight in UFC 262, this was before your daughter was born. In the post-fight interview with Rogan, you mentioned you're going to take some time off to spend time with your family. So now let's shift over a little bit to family. You're a very family-oriented person. You make sure that your daughter is with you everywhere you go. Like I mentioned at convention in 2021, she was in your hands practically the whole entire time.
Yeah.
Besides this time where you're giving the speech, that was the only time you put it down. And so you took her to Abu Dhabi. I've heard reports she was at training camps. My question to you is, why is it so important for you to bring your family with you everywhere you go? It's technically work for you.
If you look at society right now, this is, I think, the number one cause of the reason why our society is falling apart is a lack of fathers, is a lack of men stepping up and doing their part. So I think being a father, making sure my daughters know what a good man is so important. So making sure they're always around me and I can give them, the more examples I can give them, the better. And last thing I want is, when she was 3 months old, I want to say, I went to Haiti for 3 days. And when I came back, like our relationship dynamic changed because I used to sing her to sleep. And then I came back, all of a sudden she didn't want me. She wanted her mother. And that kind of freaked me out. So
Mm.
I don't. I didn't want to go 2 weeks away from my family for the fight and then come back and all of a sudden my daughter barely recognizes me because she's just barely one. That being said, they act like, oh, if you bring your kid to your fight, it's gonna not help or whatever, or it's gonna make you. I don't know what they're thinking. They're like, oh, I have to get away from my family in order to be ready. No, you don't. You just
Mm.
need to train hard, do what you need to do, and then go be the family man.
Yeah.
It's really that. I don't know. Everybody's different, I guess, but I don't believe in the whole idea that you have to completely separate from your family and you have to sacrifice this and that. There's genuine sacrifices you have to make, and then there's ones you don't. You're just being too much.
Yeah, I mean, my dad would call it selfishness by not bringing people on. Me and my brother have an inside joke where if my dad could, he would have brought us to his wedding. So,
Yeah,
that's the thing. Like, that's the old school mentality, though. You
yeah,
bring your wife and your kids everywhere.
yeah. It keeps the family together, and that's a really important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I actually want to take a quick pause and just as a thank you for you making this time. I know you have a very busy day. We actually got you something.
Oh, wow,
So, a good buddy of mine, you might know him. His name is Marvin Baruta over in Chicago.
hmm,
He took the time and he helped me make these custom gloves for you.
wow.
One of them is the Assyrian theme, and the other is Christianity themed.
Wow.
So these are MMA gloves just for you, man. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This is really kind of you. What's the owl supposed to do?
That's actually my logo for Lazy Intellectuals.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. That's cool.
Thank you. Those are all yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it, brother.
You got it. Appreciate it. And I have just one more request from you before we finish up with these questions. I hope you can give me a really quick gift. I don't know how much you know about PSA cards and grading and stuff, but I actually have your PSA 10 card, which means this is the most perfect condition card there can be.
Wow.
And so I would really hope that you could give me a quick autograph on it
Yeah,
on
of
camera.
course. I'm actually this is what I'm going to is a card show soon. So, and
Awesome.
it's supposed to be real busy. I can just go right here and sign, right?
Right here is cool,
All
yeah.
right.
Don't block your face.
That's what they tell me when I sign posters. Hey, not the face.
This is awesome, man. Thank you so much.
If I don't like the guy, I'll sign on the face.
I'll take that as a good sign then that you like it.
We're good.
Cool. If you're enjoying this content, leave a like, comment down below what your favorite part is, and subscribe. Thank you. We all see supermodels and athletes and think, man, if I could eat what they're eating, I could have a body just like theirs. Well, now you can. With this amazing recipe e-cookbook, you can get a digital download with 38 amazing pages, all written by Chef Presley himself, that he used these recipes for his 200-pound weight loss journey. Train like Tyson Fury and share his favorite lunch exactly the way it's made and prepared for him by Chef Presley himself. Fighters of all kind eat these same exact dishes, even a knockout taste that Errol Spence Jr. approves of. Fighting's not your style? That's cool. Too barbaric for your civilized taste buds? How about you taste what country musician Brantley Gilbert's favorite meal is? Yeehaw. Cook like Chef Presley and eat like a champion. Link down in the description to get your own purchase today. The Assyrian American Association of North Texas and the Assyrian Youth Group of North Texas is a proud sponsor of Lazy Intellectuals. Established in 2018, the AAANT and their youth group is a 501c3 organization, promotes the heritage of Assyrians and Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. AAANT and AYGNT proudly work to preserve a brighter future for all the Assyrians in North Texas. Feel free to show them some support by engaging with their social media by Facebook or their Instagram at AAA North Texas. You can also check them out on texasassyrians.org and send a tax-deductible charitable donation to support their cause. Join AAANT and AYGNT as they host the Assyrian legend Juliana Gendu on March 25th for Assyrian New Year's at the Minerva Banquet Hall. Discounted pre-sale tickets are on sale now until March 11th. Back to our scheduled program. UFC 280. Your post-fight. You actually were speaking with Brett Okamoto, if that's how you pronounce his name, and you said, quote, "I'm a servant in all things, except in those 15 minutes, 25 minutes, I'm free to be the broken savage that I am." Question for you. Outside of the ring, or the octagon rather, do you ever feel like that broken savage can be let out? Do you have to restrain yourself? And what exactly do you mean by broken savage?
You know, I always explain to people the reason why I love fighting is I genuinely take pleasure in breaking men. You know, that was the thing that made me fall in love with Jiu Jitsu the most. I used to go to competitions and, you know, I started late, so I wasn't the best technically, but if I just kept pushing, kept going back and back and back and back, you would see men break. And a guy who was technically superior to me all of a sudden is like starting to struggle, and from struggling to defending, from defending to just trying to survive, and from surviving to giving up. I took genuine joy in that, and you know, when I tell people that, they always look at me like I'm crazy, and I get it. It's there's definitely something not normal in that. So that's the broken savage I always talk about. And as far as letting him out outside the octagon, you know, if I have to defend my family, defend myself, obviously, but I've come to realize if you make good decisions and keep yourself in the right place, being at the, you know, not going in the wrong places, not hanging out late night at places where, you know, it gets rowdy or whatever, it's helped me not have to rely on that savage, right? So maybe there are times that he's needed, but so far I hasn't been an issue for me. I pretty much just save him for either training or the fights. And even in training, I don't really go into that mode too much anymore.
Got it. And yeah, the reason I'm asking is because a lot of people today be like, well, how can you be part of such a peaceful religion if you're a fighter, and you kind of responded to it. You're like, well, if you're taking from the atheist point of view and you're saying survival of the fittest.
Yeah, so I actually have another answer for that. The way I look at it is like this. If I have hatred towards my opponent, Jesus says if you have hated your brother, you have committed murder. So it's scary. It's a scary thought. So with that being said, just about everyone's committed murder, and that's a grave sin. But so I've come to realize as long as I stand in that octagon, whoever's in front of me and whatever they've said to me over the years or over the months that are leading up to the fight, as long as I don't hate this person, as long as there's no hatred between us, I'm good. I can go on, fight, focus on my techniques, focus on my desire to win and do these things. But the thing that would take it from being a competition to being a sin would be just the hatred in my heart.
With the conversation of hatred, where do you see today's society morally now versus when you were coming up in your 20s, 30s? How do you see it change?
We are morally decaying. It's really simple. We are getting away from our values, Judeo-Christian values. Basically, we're getting away from Jesus. Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth, and you know what salt did back then? It was preserve. It preserved food because they didn't have refrigerators. It preserved society. We would preserve society, and we would keep the world from decaying. And here's the other thing. Well, you say if we're the salt, then where's the life, right? Jesus is the life. So we've gone away from Jesus, and then we've taken that salt and we've basically tossed it away. We don't have those values anymore. So our society is decaying. Honestly, that's the option we have. That's freedom, right? You can choose who you follow, and so if that's what's supposed to happen in America, that's what's supposed to happen. That's okay. Take, for example, right now Iran is the fastest growing church. People don't know about it, but it's underground church, fastest growing church. Muslims are coming to believe in Jesus, becoming Christians. China is right there, Afghanistan. And this is the underground church. And that's the cool thing about Christianity. If you look at every other religion, it stayed where it was originally started. But Christianity is the only one that's moved from the Middle East to Europe, from Europe to America, from America now to Africa as well, and Asia.
Great point.
It's Jesus is just different.
Yeah, almost any part of the world you can find people with sects of Christianity. Yeah, absolutely true. I would like to ask with this question, has your greatest struggle come inside fights or outside?
Man, I would say my greatest struggle, it was a mixture. This is just I had 2 years where I was really struggling as far as fighting goes. I wasn't doing well. I had a lot of injuries, and it had a big effect on me outside of fighting. So I guess both, right? I couldn't figure out the problem, but at the same time, that suffering, I always call it the desert. When you're suffering, you're kind of stuck in the desert. I appreciate that time because that time allowed me to draw closer to God. Because this is typically what happens when people suffer. You have really two options. You're either going to look to God and get closer to Him, or you're going to look to your sorrows and dig deeper into your sorrows.
Victim mindset.
And you just said it. So that's where we are as a culture now. Here's the scary part. We are in the desert not because of suffering, but from comfort. We are the most powerful, the richest, and most comfortable nation in the world right now. And with that comfort, we've placed ourselves in the desert because we are empty. And now with that emptiness, we have two choices. We could dig deep and look to God, or we could dig deep in our suffering and victimize ourselves. And you're seeing that a lot. You're seeing a lot of people. And you know what's funny? It kind of fulfills them, because at least it's almost like a religion for them, because it gives them something it gives them a purpose, something to live for. So that's where we're at right now.
And also it's a sense of community with those same victims. They're like, oh, it's okay.
Of
You
course,
can
yeah,
be this way.
yeah, of course, yeah. And there's nothing wrong with community and getting together to lift each other up. The problem is, because they turn away from God, they can't follow the ways of God in order to pick each other up. So they decide to do it in a way that is an opposite direction of Him. It's their actions. Let's take marriage, right? God says marriage is a good thing. They right now I think sex outside of marriage is so common. It's like it would be uncommon if you didn't have sex outside of marriage, right? So that's one thing. A lot of people in their suffering, they look to sex, and then from that, and it just turns into something vile, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So that's the nature. That's our nature. We were built to worship, so we'll either worship God or we'll find something else to worship.
Understood. And just to end on a light note, got this last question for you. How does it feel being responsible for the greatest Joe Rogan meme of all time?
Yeah, that fight with Jakar, I remember in that moment thinking to myself, oh, that was pretty good. Like that moment, because I was really frustrated in the moment of the fight because the corner was yelling, he's tired, his legs are gassed, blah, 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 blah. And
They're yelling at you?
Yeah, they were yelling at their fighter saying, hey, he's tired, so, push, push, push. And he did push, he caught me a little bit. In the fact that they were yelling that, it really bothered me. It really pissed me off. And that's what created that meme, And then for a whole year, which was the COVID year, I kept getting different ones about that picture. Like, I don't know. They'd be like, "Oh, your mom made roast beef or something," and you get the Joe Rogan meme. There's another one. It was like the first time you see boobs and you do this, and then the thousandth time you see boobs,
he's holding back.
It's like that. I got so many of those memes. It became like, I think I'm ready to move on. I remember it was like 2021, so it was a year after. I remember they reposted the video, and my wife's like, "Oh, look, they reposted it." And the funny part was, Jakar wrote, "Man, it's 2021. Let's move on." And I actually totally agreed with him. I was like, "You know what? I'm ready to move on from this." So yeah, it was pretty cool. I appreciated the meme, and now they try to do it for every fight. They try to catch the guys and the commentate, their reaction. So
yeah, you started a trend, man.
That's cool, right?
Yeah. Beneil, thank you.
Pleasure, brother.